Have you ever wondered how to use subitizing in your classroom? Well, subitizing is the ability to instantly recognize how many. And helping our students develop subitizing isn't just for pre-K to second grade. Even third through fifth grade kiddos need to develop subitizing. I'm Christina Tonnevold, the recovering traditionalist. I hope that you will stay tuned as we delve into how to use subitizing, the 5 different ways that you can use subitizing in your classroom for each grade band. Now, this is going to be a little bit longer vlog post than I normally do, and I'm going to start off with pre-K to second grade. So if you solely work with third through fifth grade students, you can skip on ahead, and I'll put up above or below this video what time stamp to kind of skip ahead if you want to. But we are going to start off with pre-K to second grade, and then we're going to talk about how to do subitizing in third through fifth grade after that. And hey, if you don't want to sit around and watch this big old long video, there's also a download that you can request right underneath this video that summarizes the top 5 ways for pre-K to second grade and the top ways to use subitizing in third through fifth grade that you could jump right into and not have to watch this whole video. But let's get started. Okay, so we're starting off with how to use subitizing in pre-K to second grade. The first thing that you should be doing is quick images, or what I like to call flash it. Basically, you are just showing a quantity, but for a limited amount of time. So something like this. And then you have it disappear. Now, how long you keep that up is dependent upon how much experience your students have had. I would not show this image and then for pre-K kids have it disappear in like 2 seconds. I probably wouldn't even show that image to pre-K kids because they should be focusing just on numbers and quantities of 0 through 5 in pre-K and K. So it depends upon the grade level of your students and how much experience they've had with subitizing. If you're a second grade teacher and your students have not had much experience with subitizing, then this is a great place to start, but you'll have to leave this up longer because students have not built the structure, especially around this image. If they've never used 10 frames before, you can't expect them to instantly know how much is here. And so instead, you might start with familiar patterns like dice patterns. So watch your screen, here comes one, and let's take a look. Students who've had experience with dice will be able to subitize this quicker than other kids. So when you're first starting out, there will be amounts that some of your kids will instantly know. Typically, it's 1, 2, and 3. They can tell 1, 2, and 3. And the research from Clements and Sarama says that above that, kids will start to develop natural patterns like dice patterns and things that they see, but as they go into larger amounts past 5, they're doing what's known as conceptual subitizing, where they are combining amounts of the small amounts to make the bigger amounts. So even as adults, we can't subitize 8. Instead, we might see 4 and 4. So you want to start with small amounts and then gradually work your way up to larger amounts. One of the ways to do that, the first place to start, is doing quick images. The next place is to do number talks or number strings. So let's take a look at a number string that you could do with small amounts. So you might start off showing an image like this and just asking kids how many is there. Now the hope is that kids would subitize that amount, but depending upon the level of your kids, again, you may have kids who are counting. However, you are crafting these number strings using images that are subitizable, right? They're able to subitize in order to tell how many is there. And then I might move into one like this, and again, ask how many are there is in this next image. Not how many are there now, because some kids might say 7, but how many is in this next image. Now, I've left the first image up because one of the cool parts of being able to subitize and doing them in a string is being able to pay attention to the relationships. Once kids are not paying attention to just counting and they're able to know that's 4 and that's 3, then we can start having discussions about what do you notice that changed? And then this brings in ideas of 1 and 2 more, 1 and 2 less, all kinds of relationship building that you can do once kids can subitize and they're not spending their time counting. Okay, we want to be able to focus on what has changed and the relationships that kids can build. So again, I might show an image like this, and then right after it, show an image like this, and be able to talk about how many was there each time, but also be able to talk about what has changed. What do you notice what kind of relationship do these 2 images have? Now, if you want to do a number talks are typically around one problem or one image. And then you have kids talk about all the different ways that they solved that problem. Or in this case, when it's an image, how do you know how many are there? How did you figure it out? And how did you figure it out? You're asking the kids to talk about the various ways that they figured it out. Now, here's my warning. This kind of an image is really wonderful for subitizing. However, it's not very good for doing a number talk with, because most kids either just know it, they just are able to subitize that and they know that that's 6, or you might get kids who will say, well, it's 5 and 1 more. You might get kids who talk about, well, it's 4 less than 10. This image, that's usually not the number one way that kids will see this. You'll typically get kids who will say 5 and 1 more. And then you're asked, okay, how else did you see it? And that's when you'll get like the really off the wall things from kids, because you're asking them how else, and yet there's no other way that they saw this. So they'll come up with something that really has no relationship to what's actually in that image. So if you want to do a number talk, you probably need to do one that's not subitizable. So same amount right there, but it's not instantaneous. Not even for us adults, right? If I hadn't told you that was the same amount and I just started with that, you would have figured out how many were in that 10 frame differently than how I did. So doing a number talk needs to have visual images that allow different ways to see it. And when we're focused on subitizing, usually we just are seeing it. We just know. Okay, so doing number strings you can use subitizable images to help look at relationships, but when you're doing a number talk, you're not going to have the whole image be subitizable. There are parts of this image that's subitizable. A lot of kids might see 3 somewhere in this image. Now, the way I'm not pointing it out, because how you saw 3 may be different than how I saw 3. So it just allows for kids to be able to make their own grouping systems. And that is a big idea, because oftentimes in our real life, things are not given to us in a nice 10 frame with the top row filled first and then the bottom row. We have to find ways to group it ourselves. So helping kids to find groupable amounts or subitizable amounts is really helpful when you're doing number talks. All right, my next one for pre-K to second grade is to remove the visuals. And I know that's kind of counterintuitive, because subitizing seems to be all about visuals and helping kids see quantities, which is a huge, big, important deal. But we don't want kids to always have to rely on visuals. There are lots of things in our life where we aren't subitizing a visual amount, but instead subitizing something kinesthetic, like movements or auditory. So you might do activities like, when I clap 3 times, then I want you to line up for PE. And so you might clap once, and then you might clap 4 times. And then you might clap twice. And then you might clap 3 times, right? And they have to be able to hear that audio in order to be able, and they're subitizing that, right? The same is true when kids are doing syllables. When we're asking kids how many syllables are in something, we are basically asking them to hold that amount in their head, right? If I ask a kid how many syllables are in my name, right? If I have to figure out how many syllables are in my name, Christina, I can maybe break that into syllables, but if they're not able to subitize, they won't be able to tell you how many syllables there were, right? Think about the auditory pieces in our lives that really require kids to subitize, right? And provide opportunities for kids to do those in your classroom. All right, now if you noticed in that last one, I did an activity known as using non-examples. So oftentimes when it comes to subitizing, we will just show an amount and we'll ask how many. So with the clapping that I just did, I was combining this idea of using auditory, but also doing non-examples. So I told the example I gave was that they could go line up for PE if I clapped 3 times. But I didn't clap 3 times to begin with, right? I was doing non-examples so that they would have to really pay attention and see the amount, or hear, in that case, the amount. You could do the same thing with flashcards, or if you make dot pattern plates. A lot of people will do paper plates and then use the little yard sale stickers. So you might have plates like this where you've got amounts on there, and you'll say, when I show 5 and only 5 dots on a dot plate, you can go line up for PE. So you might get your dot plates out and you're showing them dot plates and you're flipping through them. And then when you land on the one that's 5, then the kids can go line up. It's a quick way for them to get lots of practice, because even though I wasn't asking how many here or how many here, they were thinking about, is that 5? And they're starting to subitize and say, nope, that's not 5, that's 8. Nope, that wasn't 5, that was 4. So they're doing it themselves without you having to ask every single time, how many is this? It's a quick way to get through a lot of subitizing images. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about is how the structure that we put in place is leading to helping kids with predictability. But sometimes that's tough for a group of our kids. Now, there's no research to back me up on this, just my personal experience and experiences of a whole lot of other teachers that I've talked to. Kids who have unpredictable lives tend to struggle more with subitizing, because we are using a structure, a built-in structure that seems obvious to us, and we can rely upon that structure to help us out. But for a group of our kids, they are not used to rely upon predictability. And we're really asking them to trust that every time when that 10 frame is up there and the top row is filled in, it's 5. If they don't trust it, they're going to count every single time. You probably have kiddos in your classroom who every time you hold up a full hand of fingers, they still count every single one of those fingers because they have not built the trust. They don't think it's predictable. They don't have predictable home lives, so why would it be predictable? How can they rely upon the fact and trust that every time it's going to be 5, right? And so just repeated exposure, helping to use that structure all the time. You're going to have kids who, after just 1 or 2 times of seeing images like this, they trust that that top is always going to be 5. But you're going to have kids that it might take 100 times of counting that top row one by one to get to where they trust that it's always 5. Okay? So I just want to be open about the fact that some kids, Subitizing comes more readily, and other kids, they need extended exposure to trust the structure that we are putting in front of them. It doesn't come naturally for them. Okay, so just keep that in mind as you work to build Subitizing for your pre-K to second grade kiddos. All right, so let's now move into 3rd through 5th grade. How do we use Subitizing in 3rd through 5th grade? Well, again, I'm going to start off with quick images or flashing amounts. Okay, and it's with whatever number sizes you are working with. So you are probably familiar with images like this, right? We want kids to get those small amounts and be able to quickly tell you how many. So instead of just showing it, right, we're doing quick ones where I'm just going and flashing it for a second. As you move into 3rd through 5th grade, with those small amounts, you should be able to do it a whole lot faster. But again, that's only if they've had experience with Subitizing before. If they haven't, you're going to have to leave it up there until they can trust and they're able to Subitize those amounts, especially large amounts. Then as we transition into multiplication, we're going to use those small amounts to then have groups of those amounts. And again, I would leave that up longer, shorter, depending upon how much time the kids need and how much exposure they've had to Subitizing. Right? For adults, we could probably do that a whole lot quicker, and I could flash that. And the idea is you want to take it away sooner than they have the time to count. You want them to try to picture what they just saw, be able to hold the amount in their head. Now, that only works if they've had experience, again, with those small amounts. So this is only a comfortable situation for kids if they've had experience with first Subitizing 5 in that dot pattern format, but also 4, because they have to be able to know that there's 4 groups, but there was 5 in each one of those groups, and then be able to move from there. Then even with multi-digit amounts, we are using base 10 blocks often, and we want kids to be able to trust that that stick of the base 10 block will always be 10, right? Once they get comfortable with that, then we can start doing quick images and don't have to leave that up there as long as we would when they're first dealing with those images. Even with fractions, I want kids to be able to instantly recognize how many was just shown there. And in case you missed it, here it was again, right? I want them to be able to tell me instantly that that is 1/3. With fractions, the visuals really do help to build their understanding of what a fraction is, being able to compare it, being able to add and subtract. It really build some deep understanding around fractions that kids don't often get. All right, so let's dig into what Subitizing can do to help our students develop some strategies when it comes to multi-digit addition. Now, oftentimes in young grades, we're using 10 frames, but 10 frames can also be really helpful as we start moving into multi-digit amounts. Now, you would want to do activities where they can tell how many this is fairly quickly. You can be doing the quick images like we did before, but I just wanted to show you how this image can then move into helping kids with addition with multi-digit amounts. So that amount is off to the left there with 37, and then if I'm adding 46 to it. Now, if I just had the digits on a piece of paper, nothing there is kind of pulling me towards a certain strategy. But when kids have a visual picture of 37 and 46, they will start to develop strategies on their own. You will get kids who will say, well, I'm going to put all the 10s together because I have 3 10s and 4 10s. That makes 7 10s. That's 70, right? And they will do that because the visual is helping them to see those. You might get some kids who will leave the 37 all as 37 and say, man, if I just had 3 more, I could fill that in and there would be 40. And so they will visually move 3 of the dots from the 46 over to the 37, and now they have 40 and 43. Those are strategies that we want kids to develop. And oftentimes our textbooks try to directly teach these strategies, but the kids don't have a visual picture to tie it to. So Subitizing gives kids those visuals, and once they have those visuals, they start to develop those strategies on their own without us having to directly teach them. As we move into multiplication, again, multiplication, the foundational way that we start to build kids' understanding of multiplication is this idea of groups of. It's not just 5 times 4. It's 5 groups of 4. And we want kids to have a visual to go with multiplication. However, as they start getting into larger amounts, it becomes hard to hold those amounts in your mind, right? If I asked you to visualize 7 groups of 3, you could probably visualize the 3 in each group, but it's hard even as adults to visualize 7 groups. So creating visuals that tie with images and structures that they've used in the early grades is super important. The 10 frame is a really powerful structure that can help us as we move into multiplication. Being able to put those 3 into a 10 frame helps kids see 7 groups of 3, but also with a strategy for figuring that out. Because oftentimes when we're multiplying with 7, it's helpful to think about it as 5 groups and 2 groups, because kids will get quick with their 5s and their 2s, and they can put 5 groups of 3 and 2 groups of 3 together to help us make 7 groups of 3. And this is the precursor to distributive property. Having those visuals, being able to subitize 7 times 3 is going to pay off and help kids have a visual when it comes to understanding distributive property. Now, as we move into developing our students' understanding of fractions, oftentimes there's not enough time spent in developing understanding, and we move straight into operating. So doing subitizing activities with fractions is really helpful for laying a foundational understanding of fraction sense. One of the big things that we need kids to understand when they first start developing an understanding of fractions is that fractional amounts are based in the unit fraction. So what that means is that this is 3/4, but 3/4 is really 3 1/4 pieces. It is 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4. Just like when I have a whole amount of 3, it's 1 plus 1 plus 1, right? We want kids to understand fractional amounts as the repetition of the unit fraction. So 3/4 is 3 1/4 pieces. And so giving them subitizable amounts can help build that understanding and showing how 1/4 relates to 2/4, which relates to 3/4, which relates to 4/4, and even into 5/4. What would 5/4 look like? That's a big deal as they're starting to develop their fraction sense. Now, one of the ways that textbooks in particular have showed visuals of fractions is by using what's known as the set amount. So those individual circles there at the top are showing 3/4. However, that visual builds this idea of out of. And I was very guilty. I would say it as out of, that you have 3 out of the 4 colored, so you have 3/4. But that image for fractions leads to some really big misunderstandings later. And I'm not going to go fully into that here, but here's a couple of the big ones. Now, when you're looking at it here, it's like, who cares? They see 3, 4, it's 3/4. But as we start moving into being able to compare amounts, so let's say I wanted kids to think about, is 1/2 or 1/3 bigger? Which is it greater than, less than, or equal to? Those kinds of activities. Well, if these are the images that they have of 1/3 and 1/2, so many of our kids will say that they're equal because you get the same amount. The same amount is colored there. You might also get kids who say 1/3 is bigger because there's more pieces there, right? Those images portray some misunderstandings that we have to go back and correct, versus if we just had it as part of a set or part of a whole instead of part of a set. You can see it's still 1/3 and 1/2, but now we're actually working out of the same whole, which kids don't get when we have it as an out of view, when it's part of a set. So showing visuals, using visuals for fractions where it is a whole that's chopped up, not a set that is colored in, is very beneficial and builds such more of a solid foundation for our students when they go to compare amounts, when they go to add fractions, and just the understanding of what fractions are. Fractions are based on the unit being repeated over and over again. And when you have part of a whole, it's easier to build that understanding for kids. So when you're doing Subitizing activities for fractions, the big thing I want to encourage you to do is have images like the right-hand side of the screen, not the left-hand side of the screen. Do images that are part of a whole, not part of a set. All right, so for 3rd through 5th grade, the last thing I want to talk about is the same thing I talked about for pre-K to 2nd. Kids need to be able to trust the structure of the images that we're using, because it leads to being able to predict ideas around those visuals. And if they don't trust the structure, they will never build that trust. And mathematics is all based on patterns and predictability. So when you're doing quantities like this, if I'm wanting kids to figure out how many is there is nothing structured here to help me out. So I'm back counting one by one by one. As soon as I put it into this structure, we tend to think that all kids will use that structure, but they don't. Right? They have to have built the trust in that structure. And if our kids have not had repeated exposure to this structure, they will not trust it. They will be back counting to be able to figure out how many. And as I talked about in the pre-K to 2nd grade section, there are some of our kids who have very unpredictable lives. And so in mathematics, when we're asking them to look at patterns, to use patterns, they don't trust those patterns because they don't have trust built in other areas of their lives. So for some of our kids, it's going to take a whole lot more time, a whole lot more repeated exposure to these structures before they will ever be able to use that structure. For some of our kids, you do it once or twice and they're going to take right off and be just fine. But don't get frustrated if some of your kids don't use the subitizable amounts that are in these images. They need to be able to do it over and over again before they will trust it. All right, that was how to use Subitizing in each of the grade bands. Now again, if you want the summary, just download it right below this video. There's links for a summary of the top 5 ways to use Subitizing for pre-K to 2nd and the top 5 ways to use Subitizing for 3rd through 5th grade. I hope that this has helped you build your math mind so you can go build the math minds of your students. Have a great day.